So recently I put out a video talking about 10 bookish items that I don't buy. It was meant to be just a fun video, largely inspired by a lot of the videos I see in the minimalism space where they talk about things for their houses that they don't buy anymore. And I just thought it was an interesting take because of the fact that there are certain things that I see a lot of other readers buy that I don't. And the last one on the list was an e-reader. And as soon as I scheduled that video to go live, not even when it was actually live, I suddenly had this burning desire to buy an e-reader, and that was only made worse once the video was published, and a lot of people in the comments really came to say how much they value their e-readers, how valuable they thought it was for their reading life, and I have a lot of friends both online and offline that also swear by their e-readers. And it started making me think that maybe I need to buy one. So I haven't committed to it yet. At the time of recording this video, I have not bought anything. I'm looking at some things. So I want to discuss all with you, the pros, the cons, and you help me decide whether or not I should fork up some money for an e-reader. Do I need this? Do I want this? Maybe. Let's talk about it. All right, let's first talk about the reasons I'm even considering getting an e-reader. One of the biggest reasons is the fact that I'm traveling a lot more for work. And with that, of course, I'm thinking about what to pack. I'm thinking about making sure that I have places where I can charge my phone in the airport, or some planes have outlets, some don't. And so I always need to be mindful of not burning through my battery, using it for things other than, of course, emergency purposes, so that I actually have my phone when I need it. And so what I've been doing for travel up until this point, and I'm still doing actually, is reading on my phone, which arguably is not the worst thing for my battery life. I think watching videos and other different activities burn my battery a lot faster, but I know everyone will say that it's not an ideal situation. The LCD screen can cause eye strain, it's very bright, and it's just not the best way to consume books. And I put up with it because arguably I didn't find it that bad, and that is kind of part of my reason for having this video, is that I don't feel like I have a huge problem. It's more that I'm wondering if things can get even better from here. So I'm definitely thinking about it. I see lots of people on airplanes and, in the airports with their e-readers, and I'm possibly feeling a little bit of FOMO. Again, do I need this device, or do I just want to be like everyone else, all the cool business people flipping out their Kindles and Kobos on the flights? Maybe. And with that, I think we should talk about the fact that a lot of people have reported that switching over to e-readers have reduced their eye strain. Now, here's my problem is I'm not sure if I'm not experiencing eye strain or if I'm so used to having my eyes be strained that I don't even know what's happening. Because I can't remember a time that I was reading a book on my phone and thought, wow, my eyes are so strained, they're so tired, I can't keep reading. I don't actually remember ever distinctly recognizing that I was having eye strain. A lot of people who have switched over to e-readers do say that you don't notice it until you make the switch, and then you realize how much more relaxing it is on your eyes. And I do need to acknowledge that my eye doctor has said multiple times that they would like me to do less screens. My eye prescription does continue to change, and that is tying into the next point, and that's the fact that I do feel I spend too much time on my phone. One of the biggest benefits I've heard for using an e-reader is that is a way to cut down on phone use and instead pick up a good habit of reading. Now for myself, part of it with being on my phone is that I might be on my phone, but often I'm reading. However, I don't like how that looks, and I don't mean to sound vain saying that. Keep in mind that I'm a parent, so when my child sees me, they don't see me reading a book. They see me swiping on my phone, and they can't tell what I'm doing on there. So I do often feel guilty that it looks like I'm just browsing the internet when actually I'm sitting and reading a book if they're happily playing or something. And so I would like to be able to more distinctly distinguish both for myself and for those around me when I'm reading and when I'm just being a lump on the couch and scrolling Instagram, because both do happen, and I think it'd be nice to separate the two in terms of that aspect to it. And I think the last reason that really compels me to look at getting a dedicated e-reader is the most superficial of all, and that is the fact that all my friends have e-readers. Virtually all my friends who read, whether they read a lot or a little, have e-readers, at least a lot of my online friends. And a lot of people are surprised that I don't have one. It's kind of the assumption that if you read a lot, this is the techie gear that you have. And so I know people who read a lot less than me that still have the e-reader and are saying, well, you read a lot more, why don't you have one? And I don't really have a good answer other than, again, the fact that I never felt like I needed one. but I kind of feel like I want one. And that is where I really get stuck, is that I'm really questioning, can I argue that this is truly going to be an upgrade and improvement? Is this really going to help my reading life and improve my experience when I'm reading? Or is this just a cool gadget that I kind of want to buy? And so that is what I'm dealing with. I want to talk a little bit more about the general pros that are typically associated with getting an e-reader in general. So as other people have talked about, one of the major benefits is the fact that for a lot of people, getting an e-reader allows them to read a lot more. From my anecdotal research on the internet, it seems like that argument typically comes from people who are very sporadic readers, perhaps people who barely read at all, and then are picking up the habit of reading again as an adult and are using the e-reader as a device to do that. And I think that I need to be mindful that just because they're reading more with an e-reader doesn't necessarily mean that that argument will apply to myself. I've said too many times on my channel, I don't mean to repeat myself, but I do read a fair amount. And so sometimes my desire isn't about reading more, it's more about looking at having a better reading experience in general. And so I don't assume that I'm suddenly going to double the amount of books I'm reading in a year by getting an e-reader. Frankly, I don't want that. And instead, I would rather it change other aspects of my reading life. So in terms of reading more, I think that argument largely depends on how much you were reading beforehand, how much you were picking up a physical book, and really looking at that. Because again, I am still doing ebooks, I'm just not doing them on an e-reading device. And so I think it might help my reading, maybe, but maybe not, and that's where you all come in. The other plus I often hear is that by getting an e-reader, it allows the device to be designed for that one purpose and really helps to take away distractions, because I know for a lot of us, we can be reading and then all of a sudden distracted by something else and end up on, again, Instagram or whatever your social media is of choice. And for myself, I don't want to say that I don't get distracted when I read, because I do stop reading multiple times and I'll go look something up. I will go and hop over to a different website or different things. But I'm not sure that actually getting an e-reader will entirely remove that, because I think what people are talking about is something a little bit more mindless, like as in you're reading and all of a sudden you're like, oh, how did I get to Instagram or Facebook? And instead for myself, I'm often reading and then I will come to something in a book that makes me think of something else and think, I want to look up what that word means, or I want to, look up the history behind what this character is talking about. And I recognize there's a dictionary in e-readers. But for myself, I feel like I'm making an actual choice and a mindful choice when I go choose to kind of do something else. And often if I am feeling like doing something else, it means that I'm not necessarily in the mood to read. Sometimes I have something else in my mind, and it almost can help for me to go look up the thing that is distracting me, get that out of my system, and then I can go back to reading and kind of reset my attention. So I'm not entirely sold on that, because again, even if I'm reading on an e-reader, likely my phone would still be near me because I do need it for, say, emergency reasons. If I needed to get a phone call from a family member, etc. I don't tend to keep it really far away regardless. And even if it was far away, I feel like I would just get up and go get my phone if I want to look something up. So I'm not convinced that it's going to take away my desire to look up other things during my reading experience. Maybe it will, but I feel like I'm intentional when I'm being distracted, or I know I'm being distracted and I'm letting myself do it anyway. And I don't know if that actual barrier of having two devices is really going to do that or not, but I know, again, love your experience down below, because I know a lot of you swear by the distraction-free experience. And the last benefit I see all the time, I think completely just depends on where you're coming from, and that is the fact that you see cost savings, or a lot of people swear by the cost savings of getting an e-reader, because it saves them from buying books constantly or physical books, and instead getting either the cheaper ebook editions or switching over to a library system. And for me, again, this is one that I don't feel applies to me as much because of the fact that I typically only buy books that I already love, and so the physical books I buy are ones I've already read typically, and then they are there to be permanent parts of my physical shelves, because of course I know if I buy an ebook, I'm really just buying a license to that ebook. And so if I do make that purchase, which I rarely do, it's really only with the intention of having that experience in the moment, knowing that that book could disappear in the future. I need to be okay with that. And so I don't buy a lot of ebooks, and so largely what I do already is most of my ebook consumption comes from the Libby library system, with a few exceptions like some digital review books that come from NetGalley. And so they're all from sources that are free to me, and so I would be saving a lot of money more doing the same type of ebook reading on a better device. So I think for some people it could definitely cut down on your book buying, but you'd have to know yourself if that would actually curb it, depending on what you're actually buying right now, and whether or not you would actually replace that habit with an ebook version of it. All right, so now let's talk about some of the cons or drawbacks of eReader, some of the things that are holding me back. And again, I'd love you to make the counter argument if you do want to encourage me to go in the direction of this purchase. One being the fact that I do struggle with a device, specifically buying a device that is only for one purpose. I know that ties into the distraction-free experience that everyone sells, but I also struggle with the fact that if I bring an eReader on a plane, I can't do anything else with it, so I still need a second device if I want to take a break from reading and again watch a video, play an app game, and all of that. So it's strange for me to buy something that is less utilitarian than everything else I always purchase. Typically, I buy technology that is meant to do a lot of things, that is very open and allowing me to do as much as possible and kind of get my money's worth. And so it does feel a bit counterintuitive to do that and to be specifically doing something that is so focused. With that, I also struggle a bit with the technology itself. Looking at it, I understand e-ink is totally different than the technology in our phones, or at least there's a lot of differences to it. And so I recently did have the opportunity to go into a local bookstore and get to play around with some of these devices. And my biggest reaction as I played around on them is how incredibly slow they were. And I did look up the models of what I was playing with after and found out that they're considered to be some of the fastest ones on the market right now, with really good operating systems, and they still felt really sluggish. So things like highlighting, looking up books, searching around the ebook store, all felt very slow, and you just felt like you were waiting for the device to do things, which is something I'm not used to seeing from, say, my phone. In fact, if I started to see my phone acting that sluggish, I would immediately be looking to see if I was ready to upgrade it if I had the money to do so, because I would be horrified if my phone was acting as slow as those e-readers was. I did see that once you're in the actual book and just clicking through the pages and you don't have a lot that you're trying to do, I didn't notice an overall slowdown unless I was trying to highlight, but it was still surprising to me if, again, I was going to be buying something brand new, not some old 10-year-old device off of a used market or whatnot. I was surprised to see that the technology feels very outdated. I'm also quite concerned about the fact that unless you go with certain Android type devices like the books, most of the e-readers, again, are very limited in terms of what you can do on them. So for most of them, you really only have access to the store that is tied to the e-reader that you're getting. And in the case of certain devices like Kobo, you do then have access to Libby. However, as someone who does a lot of reviewing for my channel, I do pull books from lots of different sources. I read on Hoopla, which is another system involved in my library that does not work with pretty much any e-readers, again, unless it's an Android type one. And then there's also, again, things like Everand, it used to be Scribd, or NetGalley. And so it would mean that even if I were to get an e-reader, there'd still be several things that I would have to read on my phone or my family tablet. And that doesn't necessarily sit well with me as someone who, again, wants this to be my new all-inclusive reading device. And again, I do need to recognize that there are devices like the books that do have an Android-based system. And so there is the option of going with that, where I could download all of those apps. My concern is, well, first and foremost, they're a lot more expensive, at least here in Canada. But on top of that, I have huge concerns with the fact that the operating system is quite old. And as an Android device, you have to be aware that if you were to be connecting to any, say, public internet or Wi-Fi, that I think there's really, at least in my mind, concerns about the security and safety of that device if it is linked to any of my personal accounts. So personally, it's not something that I'm really excited about. And I would probably lean towards something that, again, is more of a self-contained e-reader, even if it means having some limitations in terms of the apps that I can download. So let me wrap up this rambling video by talking about what I'm thinking about buying. And again, I would love you to weigh in with different opinions. For the general question of what type of e-reader I'm leaning towards, that would be the Kobo. I'm not very interested in Kindle, and I certainly have reservations and have pulled away from the Amazon system, but the biggest reason that I have never been interested in the Kindle system for an e-reader is the fact that outside the United States, here in Canada, we don't have access to the Libby library through our Kindles. So I have no idea why Canadians buy Kindles. Again, putting all of the politics aside, this is simply just saying I would never want to buy an e-reader that wasn't compatible with the main library system in Canada. It doesn't make sense to me at all. So when I found out that the alternative to that was either, again, an Android device, which I was weird about some of the outdated technology on it in terms of the older Android system, instead my other alternative ended up being the Kobo. And looking at the base models that are available here for me, that leaves me with either the Clara black and white or the Clara color for $20 more, which are the cheapest models. They're both 6-inch, virtually similar technology outside of the color e-ink added to the more expensive device. And so depending on which one I would get, it'd be roughly $200 to $250 when you consider the additional need for a case plus taxes for the device. So when I think about all that, it doesn't feel like a cheap purchase. A lot of people have told me, oh, just get an e-reader. They only cost $100. And I think that those that are saying that are probably not based here in Canada and are probably looking at the base level Kindle, which again, just doesn't make sense to buy something that isn't available to link up with my library system, because I would end up spending a lot more if I had to go into the Kindle Unlimited service or buy a bunch of ebooks in order to even use the device. So if I am going to get an e-reader, it's going to have to work with my library system, no stop. And so with that, it's kind of a bigger purchase, at least for me up front. Maybe that's no big deal to someone else, but that's a fair big chunk of change. I typically don't even spend that much on all of the physical books I buy in a year at all. So that is pretty substantial, and it's definitely a big reason holding me back. In terms of screen size, I am okay with getting the base model because I actually prefer a smaller screen because I'm used to reading on my phone. The 6-inch feels just right. I can hold it in one hand. I tried in the store that I can use my thumb to tap the screen and just move the pages that way. I tried holding the larger device, the 7-inch, the Libra, and for that one it felt awkward in my hand. I felt like I would need 2 hands to hold it, and I recognize that that device comes with the buttons, and everyone swears by how great the buttons are, but because I've never had them, I feel like I can get away without them because, again, as much as they are great, and I'm sure they are, if I've never experienced buttons, I won't miss them. I have no doubt that if I eventually do upgrade to a device with buttons, it'd be really hard to go back to a device that only had the touch screen, but for now, that's okay with me. My biggest conundrum is one that I would really, again, love for you to weigh in on, because I'll be honest, I'm really leaning towards this purchase, and that's the fact that I have to decide if I want to do the black and white, or for $20 more, 20 Canadian, I could get the color version. And interestingly enough, a lot of the internet swears by the fact that the cheaper device, the black and white, is the better e-reader. There is better contrast because there is no overlay of the color screen. And so everyone I talk to online and in person tells me that if I'm going to get my first e-reader, to go ahead and get the black and white one. And unless I'm reading a ton of comics on that one, which arguably, again, we do have a family tablet that I could use to do graphic novels and such from Hoopla, and that's typically where I would get them from, I don't have a really good reason to get the color one. But I kind of like the color one. I kind of like seeing the covers in color. I think it looks a lot nicer. I feel like it gives the device more of a premium feel when I did get to see the black and white one in person, because I come from reading again on LCD screens. It felt strange to not have color. It kind of felt like I was playing with a really cheap device as opposed to, again, looking at the color one. It just felt a little bit nicer. I recognize the color is more washed out. It kind of reminds me of like a newspaper print or the old Archie comics, if anyone else read those growing up. And so I don't actually mind the look of the color, even if it's a bit more muted. I would still rather have that than nothing. And what I have heard in my anecdotal research on the internet is that the people who are most happy with the color are those that never had an e-reader before and don't notice that the contrast isn't as good on the device. And I honestly don't mind a darker screen because I read everything on my phone in dark mode, even if I'm reading in the middle of the day. So I think I can get away with that. Again, I could just switch to dark mode, or just be okay with the screen looking a little bit darker. I've said before, but I don't like the look of an e-reader when it looks like you're reading off a piece of printer paper. That actually does not look attractive to me. I would much rather read on a device where the back screen looked more like a grayish paper, much more like the older books that I do tend to consume in paper form. So I'm leaning that way. I'm leaning to color. All that being said, I have not committed to this purchase. I am really, really tempted, but as you've heard throughout this video, I feel like I don't really need it. I don't hate reading on my phone. I did a ton of research over this last month all about getting an e-reader, and then at the end of the day, I will go to bed and I will sometimes just sit on my phone and read. And it's a really good experience for me, which maybe sounds crazy, but I like how it fits in my hand. I don't mind the screen. I don't notice any eye strain, even if it's ruining my eyes. I don't know it. And it's hard to justify the purchase. It's hard to put money out saying I need this when I already have other devices, like again, my family tablet and my personal phone, that kind of do the same thing. So I kind of want you to convince me to get an e-reader, but again, if you feel the other way, also argue with me there, because I don't want to throw money away. I like to be someone who spends my money wisely. It's kind of part of what I'm trying to incorporate into my channel, is being a frugal or mindful reader and consumer. But I kind of want an e-reader, so help me out here. Drop your thoughts and comments down below. I want your feedback, good or bad. Convince me one way or the other. Do you think the Clara Kobo is the way to go for a Canadian who wants to access their library system? Do you have a good, strong opinion why I should go ahead with something like an Android reader? I'm not sure about those, so I need some convincing if you want to sway me that way. All that being said, thank you so much for sticking around for my rambly video, talking through all of my thoughts about whether or not I should get an e-reader device. If I were to pick one up, I understand that Kobo typically has a Mother's Day sale, which here in North America would be around the first half of May. So I'll be keeping my eyes on that. I think it's only $20 off if they go on sale. So again, not a huge saving, still a really big expense, and I recognize I'm pretty privileged to even consider having the money to throw at something like this. But I'm awfully tempted to see what all of the hype is about, to go down that rabbit hole, to join the e-reader club and really see what it can do for my reading experience. Can it really help me to fall in love with reading all over again? Not that I've fallen out of reading, but arguably I have gone through a really distracted time with my job, really pulling my attention. I have a lot less hours to read. And if I have less hours to read, the question is, will an e-reader fix that? Or if the problem is time, am I just throwing money at a device to solve a problem that it won't fix? So many questions for you all. Love your comments and discussion down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all those good things if you feel desire to, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.